The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of Isabelle Martinez's small apartment in Denver, Colorado, casting gentle shadows across the nursery she had spent months preparing. At 23, Isabelle possessed an old soul that had been shaped by years of responsibility beyond her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, evidence of another sleepless night with her 3-week-old daughter, Sofia.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Isabelle stood by the window, gently rocking Sofia in her arms, watching the neighborhood come alive. Dog walkers emerged from brownstone apartments, joggers passed by in their morning routines, and the coffee shop on the corner began its daily ritual of serving the early commuters. This was her world now, smaller than she had once imagined it would be, but filled with a love so profound it sometimes took her breath away. "Good morning, my little sunshine," she whispered to Sofia, whose tiny fist had found its way to her mouth. The baby's eyes, still that newborn blue that might change to brown like her mother's, gazed up with the unfocused wonder that only infants possess. These quiet moments before the day truly began had become sacred to Isabelle, just her and Sofia existing in their own bubble of peace. The apartment itself told the story of a young woman who had made difficult choices with grace. The living room doubled as Isabelle's workspace, where her laptop sat surrounded by textbooks from Denver Community College. She was pursuing her degree in early childhood education, taking online classes that fit around Sofia's schedule. The walls were decorated with photos from happier times, her high school graduation, pictures with her parents before the accident 2 years ago, and newer photos documenting her pregnancy journey. Isabelle's life had been a series of unexpected turns that had led her to this moment. Growing up in a middle-class family in Aurora, she had been the responsible older sister to her younger brother Marcus, who was now 21 and struggling to find his place in the world. Their parents, Elena and Roberto Martinez, had been killed in a car accident during her sophomore year of college, leaving Isabelle to navigate grief while suddenly becoming Marcus's guardian. The tragedy had derailed her original plans of studying at Colorado State University and pursuing a career in environmental science. Instead, she had transferred to a local community college, taken a part-time job at a daycare center, and tried to keep Marcus on track while processing her own overwhelming loss. It was during this tumultuous period that she had met James, Sofia's father, a charming but ultimately unreliable musician who had promised her the world but delivered only heartbreak and an unplanned pregnancy. When Isabelle discovered she was pregnant, James had already moved on to his next adventure, leaving behind only a forwarding address in California and empty promises about staying in touch. The initial devastation had given way to a fierce determination. If she was going to raise this child alone, she would do it right. She had spent her pregnancy working extra hours at the daycare, saving every penny she could, and preparing herself mentally and emotionally for single motherhood. The apartment reflected her practical approach to life. Every item served a purpose, from the convertible crib that would grow with Sofia to the organized shelves of baby supplies that Isabelle had accumulated through careful shopping and generous gifts from her coworkers at Little Sprouts Daycare Center. The place was small but clean, filled with natural light and the kind of thoughtful touches that spoke of someone who understood that a home wasn't about size or luxury, but about love and intention. Marcus had been initially supportive during her pregnancy, even helping her paint the nursery a soft yellow that would work for any gender. But as the reality of her sister becoming a mother set in, something had shifted in their relationship. He had started spending more time with his girlfriend, Chelsea Thompson, a 25-year-old who worked sporadically as a bartender and had strong opinions about everything from parenting to politics. Chelsea was everything Isabelle was not. Spontaneous where Isabelle was planned, outspoken where Isabelle was thoughtful, and dismissive of responsibility where Isabelle embraced it. She had bleached blonde hair that she changed regularly, a collection of tattoos that told stories of impulse rather than meaning, and a laugh that could fill a room but often came at someone else's expense. The relationship between Isabelle and Chelsea had been strained from the beginning. Chelsea seemed to view Isabelle's responsible nature as judgment on her own lifestyle, While Isabelle struggled to understand what her brother saw in someone who seemed so determined to avoid growing up, but Marcus was besotted, and Isabelle had learned to keep her concerns to herself for the sake of family peace. Their parents' house in Aurora had been sold after the accident, with the proceeds split between the siblings. Isabelle had used her portion to secure the apartment, buy a reliable used car, and create a small emergency fund for Sofia's future. Marcus had initially planned to use his share for college, but under Chelsea's influence, the money had gradually disappeared on concerts, weekend trips, and what they called investing in experiences. This morning, as Isabelle prepared Sofia's bottle with the precision of someone who had read every parenting book in the library, she reflected on how much her world had contracted and expanded simultaneously. Her social circle had shrunk to her coworkers at the daycare and a few young mothers she had met in her prenatal classes. Yet her capacity for love had grown in ways she never could have imagined.
The daycare job had been a blessing in disguise. Working with children from infancy through preschool age had given Isabelle practical experience that no book could provide. She had learned to read the subtle cues of a fussy baby, to recognize the difference between hunger cries and tired cries, and to trust her instincts when something seemed off. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patricia Williams, had become something of a mentor, offering both professional guidance and maternal wisdom that Isabelle deeply valued. "Children can sense authenticity," Mrs. Williams had told her during one of their conversations. "They know when someone genuinely cares about their well-being versus when someone is just going through the motions. You have that genuine care, Isabelle. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." These words had become a source of strength during the sleepless nights and moments of self-doubt that came with new motherhood. Isabelle had read somewhere that having a baby was like having your heart walking around outside your body, and she understood that sentiment completely. Every decision she made now was filtered through the lens of what was best for Sofia. The nursery had been set up with meticulous care. The crib was positioned away from the window to avoid drafts, but close enough to catch the morning light. A comfortable rocking chair, a gift from her coworkers, sat in the corner next to a small bookshelf already filled with picture books and lullaby collections. The changing table was stocked with supplies, and a baby monitor sat ready to ensure Isabelle could hear Sofia from any room in the small apartment. As Sofia finished her morning feeding, Isabelle felt the familiar wave of protective love wash over her. This tiny person depended on her for everything: food, comfort, safety, love. It was simultaneously the most overwhelming and most natural thing she had ever experienced. Every parenting decision, from the brand of formula she used to the temperature of Sofia's bathwater, was made with careful consideration and research. The responsibility was immense, but Isabelle had discovered reserves of strength she never knew existed. She had successfully navigated the challenges of late pregnancy while working and studying. She had handled the intensity of labor and delivery largely alone, with only a nurse practitioner from her prenatal class as her birth partner. She had figured out breastfeeding, diaper changes, and the mysterious art of getting a newborn to sleep. Yet despite her growing confidence as a mother, Isabelle sometimes felt the weight of isolation. Her friends from high school had moved on to different life stages. Some were finishing college, others were starting careers or traveling. They tried to stay in touch, but the gap between their experiences had grown wider with each passing month. Late-night texts about weekend plans had been replaced by brief exchanges of congratulations and promises to visit that never quite materialized. This isolation made family connections even more precious. Marcus and Chelsea visited regularly, though their visits often left Isabelle feeling more tired than refreshed. Chelsea had strong opinions about everything, from Isabelle's parenting choices to her living situation, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never actually been responsible for another person's well-being. "You're being too cautious," Chelsea would say when Isabelle checked Sofia's temperature for the third time or researched the ingredients in a new baby product. "Babies are tougher than you think. You can't wrap her in bubble wrap forever." But Isabelle understood something that Chelsea didn't.
that vigilance wasn't paranoia when it came to protecting someone so vulnerable. Every decision mattered because Sofia couldn't advocate for herself. She couldn't say when something tasted wrong, when she felt unsafe, or when someone's behavior made her uncomfortable. Isabelle was Sofia's voice, her protection, her entire world. As the morning progressed and Denver fully came alive outside her window, Isabelle felt a deep sense of purpose settling over her. This life she had built might not have been the one she had planned, but it was hers, and it was good. She had created a safe, loving environment for her daughter, maintained her studies, and was slowly building toward a future that would provide stability and opportunity for both of them. The phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Chelsea wants to come over later to meet Sofia properly. She's been feeling bad about not visiting since you got home from the hospital." Isabelle smiled, choosing to focus on the gesture rather than the fact that her sister-in-law had managed to avoid meeting her new niece for 3 weeks. Family was complicated, but it was still family. Today felt like a perfect day for new beginnings.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Little Sprouts Daycare Center as Isabelle finished organizing the infant room supplies. She had returned to work part-time just 2 weeks after Sofia's birth, a decision driven more by financial necessity than desire. The Colorado Family and Medical Leave Act provided some protection, but unpaid leave wasn't an option for someone living paycheck to paycheck. Mrs. Patricia Williams watched from the doorway as Isabelle methodically checked each crib, ensuring the sheets were fresh and the sleep sacks were properly positioned. At 62, Patricia had been running Little Sprouts for over 20 years, and she had developed an eye for recognizing which employees truly understood child development versus those who were simply going through the motions. "You know, Isabelle," Patricia said, stepping into the room, "I've been thinking about our conversation last month regarding the assistant director position." Isabelle looked up from the supply cart, her heart skipping slightly. The assistant director role would mean a significant salary increase, better benefits, and the kind of career stability that would change everything for her and Sofia. More importantly, it would put her on a clear path toward eventually opening her own childcare facility, a dream that had crystallized during her pregnancy. "The board approved the posting yesterday," Patricia continued, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her a trusted figure in the Denver childcare community. "I want you to know that while I can't guarantee anything, your application would be viewed very favorably. Your educational background, combined with your natural instincts with children, makes you exactly the kind of professional we need in leadership." The opportunity represented everything Isabelle had been working toward. The position would provide health insurance that actually covered Sofia's pediatric care, enough income to move to a larger apartment in a better school district, and the professional credibility to eventually pursue her own licensing. But it also came with increased responsibility and longer hours, a trade-off that would require careful consideration of Sofia's needs. "There's one thing I need to be transparent about," Patricia added, lowering her voice. "The promotion would require completion of your early childhood education degree within 18 months. I know you're taking classes online now, but this would mean accelerating your timeline." Isabelle nodded, her mind already calculating the logistics. She was currently taking 6 credit hours per semester while working 25 hours per week at the daycare. Doubling her course load would mean less sleep, more stress, and even greater reliance on Marcus and Chelsea for emergency childcare. But it would also mean securing Sofia's future in a way that seemed impossible just moments ago. As her shift ended, Isabelle packed Sofia's diaper bag with the precision of someone who had learned that forgetting even one item could derail an entire day. The bag contained not just diapers and bottles, but also a detailed schedule she had created documenting Sofia's feeding times, sleep patterns, and behavioral cues. This information wasn't just helpful for babysitters. It was essential for maintaining the consistency that child development experts emphasized as crucial for infant security. The drive home took her through the neighborhoods where she had grown up. past the elementary school where she had first dreamed of becoming a teacher, and by the community center where she and Marcus had spent countless afternoons during their parents' work hours. These familiar streets now looked different through the lens of motherhood. She found herself evaluating playgrounds for their safety features, noticing which neighborhoods had sidewalks suitable for stroller walks, and mentally cataloging the locations of pediatric clinics and emergency services. Back at the apartment, Isabelle discovered Marcus and Chelsea already waiting in the hallway outside her door. Chelsea was dressed in her typical style, ripped jeans, an oversized flannel shirt, and boots that had seen better days. Her makeup was applied with the heavy hand of someone who had learned their techniques from YouTube tutorials rather than professional guidance, and she carried a large purse that seemed to contain everything she owned. Marcus, in contrast, looked tired. His job at a local electronics store provided enough income to cover his basic expenses, but the work was uninspiring and offered little opportunity for advancement. Since their parents' death, he had struggled to find direction, cycling through different career ideas without committing to any particular path. Chelsea's presence in his life had initially seemed positive. She encouraged him to take risks and embrace spontaneity, but Isabelle was beginning to wonder if what he needed was more stability, not less. "We brought dinner," Marcus announced, holding up a bag from a local Mexican restaurant. "Figured you might not have had time to cook with everything going on." The gesture was thoughtful, though Isabelle noticed that the restaurant they had chosen was one of the more expensive options in the neighborhood. Since Sofia's birth, she had become acutely aware of the cost of everything, from grocery receipts to utility bills. Every dollar spent on convenience or luxury was a dollar not going towards Sofia's future or her own education. Chelsea immediately gravitated toward the baby carrier where Sofia was sleeping peacefully. "Oh my God! She's gotten so much bigger already?" she exclaimed, her voice carrying the volume of someone unaccustomed to moderating their tone around sleeping infants. "Can I hold her?"
Isabelle felt the familiar tension that arose whenever someone else wanted to handle Sofia. It wasn't that she didn't trust people, but rather that she had spent 3 weeks learning to read Sofia's subtle cues and needs. Other people, even well-meaning family members, often missed the signs that Sofia was becoming overstimulated or needed a feeding. "She just fell asleep about 20 minutes ago," Isabelle explained gently. "Maybe once she wakes up for her next feeding?" Chelsea's expression shifted slightly, and Isabelle recognized the look she had seen before, a mixture of dismissal and irritation that suggested Chelsea viewed Isabelle's careful parenting as unnecessary anxiety rather than appropriate caution. "You know, babies sleep better when they get used to noise and activity," Chelsea said, reaching toward the carrier despite Isabelle's explanation. "If you keep everything too quiet all the time, she'll never learn to sleep through normal household sounds." The comment contained just enough truth to be difficult to counter directly. Isabelle had read about helping babies develop healthy sleep patterns and understood that some environmental noise could be beneficial. But she also knew that newborns needed different care than older infants, and that Sofia's sleep patterns were still developing. As they settled around the small dining table, Marcus updated Isabelle on his work situation and his ongoing uncertainty about his future career path. The conversation revealed the fundamental difference in how the siblings had responded to their parents' death. Where Isabelle had channeled her grief into increased responsibility and forward planning, Marcus had become more impulsive and less focused on long-term consequences. "Chelsea thinks I should quit the electronics store and try bartending with her. The money can be really good on busy nights, and it would give me more flexibility to figure out what I really want to do." Isabelle chose her words carefully. As Marcus's older sister, she felt responsible for his well-being, but she had learned that direct advice often triggered his defensive responses. "What would you do about health insurance? And would the income be consistent enough to cover your rent and other expenses?" Chelsea laughed, a sound that carried a slight edge. "Not everything has to be planned out to the penny, Isabelle. Sometimes you have to take risks to really live. Marcus is young. This is the time to experiment and try different things."
The conversation highlighted a fundamental tension that had been growing between Isabelle and her brother since Sofia's birth. Where once they had been united in their approach to rebuilding their lives after their parents' death, they now seemed to be moving in opposite directions. Isabelle was becoming more focused on security and stability, while Marcus was gravitating towards spontaneity and risk-taking. As the evening progressed, Sofia awoke and began showing signs of hunger. Isabelle excused herself to prepare a bottle, following her established routine of testing the temperature and ensuring the formula was properly mixed. Through the thin walls of the apartment, she could hear Chelsea and Marcus talking in low voices, though she couldn't make out the specific words. When she returned with Sofia and the bottle, she found Chelsea browsing through the parenting books on her shelf. "Wow, you really went all out with the research," Chelsea commented, holding up a book about infant development. "I mean, people have been raising babies for thousands of years without needing instruction manuals." The comment contained just enough truth to be difficult to counter directly. Isabelle had read about helping babies develop healthy sleep patterns and understood that some environmental noise could be beneficial. But she also knew that newborns needed different care than older infants and that Sofia's sleep patterns were still developing. "I just want to make sure I'm doing everything right," Isabelle replied, settling into the rocking chair with Sofia. "She depends on me for everything, so I want to be as informed as possible." "But you have to trust your instincts too," Chelsea continued, her tone suggesting she was offering profound wisdom rather than unsolicited advice. "Babies can sense when you're anxious or overthinking everything. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just relax and go with the flow." As Sofia began feeding, Isabelle felt the familiar sense of peace that came with these quiet moments. The baby's contentment was evidence that her careful approach was working. Sofia was gaining weight appropriately, sleeping in healthy patterns, and showing all the signs of a thriving infant. The validation from her pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Chen, had been reassuring. "You're doing an excellent job, Isabelle. Sofia is clearly benefiting from your attentive care." The evening wound down with Marcus and Chelsea preparing to leave. As they gathered their things, Chelsea made one final comment that would stick in Isabelle's mind long after they were gone. "You know, if you ever want to go out or need a break, Marcus and I would be happy to babysit Sofia. We may not have read all the books, but we're family. Sometimes that's more important than following every single rule." The offer was generous, but it also carried an undertone that made Isabelle uncomfortable. The suggestion that her careful parenting was somehow excessive, that love and good intentions were sufficient substitutes for knowledge and preparation, contradicted everything she believed about responsible childcare. As she locked the door behind them and prepared Sofia for her bedtime routine, Isabelle reflected on the complex dynamics of family relationships. She loved Marcus deeply and wanted him to be part of Sofia's life, but she was beginning to realize that loving someone didn't automatically make them a suitable caregiver for her daughter. The stakes of every decision felt enormous because Sofia's well-being depended entirely on Isabelle's judgment. One mistake in choosing a babysitter, one moment of misplaced trust, one decision to prioritize convenience over caution could have consequences that would last a lifetime. The responsibility was a burden and a privilege, the weight of protecting someone so precious, combined with the honor of being entrusted with her care.
3 days later, Isabelle found herself in an unexpected predicament. Her American literature professor had moved up the deadline for a major research paper, worth 30% of her final grade, from next week to tomorrow morning. The assignment required access to physical archives at the Denver Public Library's research collection, resources that weren't available online and couldn't be accessed during her usual late-night study sessions. The timing couldn't have been worse. Sofia had been particularly fussy the past 2 days, possibly due to a growth spurt that had disrupted her feeding schedule. Isabelle had been operating on less than 4 hours of sleep per night, and the thought of trying to complete graduate-level research while caring for a cranky newborn felt overwhelming. As she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, Isabelle calculated her options.
The library's special collections department closed at 6 p.m., and she needed at least 4 hours to locate the primary source documents required for her paper. Her usual backup plan, studying while Sofia napped, wouldn't work because the research had to be conducted in person. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's my favorite niece today? Chelsea keeps talking about wanting to spend more time with Sofia." The message arrived like an answer to an unspoken prayer. Despite her reservations about Chelsea's parenting philosophies, Isabelle recognized that she was in a position where she needed help. The research paper was crucial for maintaining her GPA, which in turn was essential for securing the assistant director position at Little Sprouts. Sometimes being a good mother meant making difficult choices about when to accept assistance. She called Marcus, explaining her situation with the careful tone of someone who needed a favor but didn't want to appear desperate. "I know this is last minute, but would you and Chelsea be available to watch Sofia for about 5 hours this afternoon? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't really important." "Of course," Marcus responded immediately. "Chelsea will be thrilled. She was just saying yesterday how she wished she could bond more with Sofia. This is perfect timing." The enthusiasm in his voice was reassuring, though Isabelle noticed he hadn't mentioned his own excitement about spending time with his niece. Still, this wasn't the time to analyze family dynamics. She needed to focus on practical preparations. For the next hour, Isabelle created detailed instructions that covered every conceivable scenario. She typed up Sofia's feeding schedule, including the exact temperature for warming bottles and the specific burping techniques that worked best. She documented Sofia's sleep cues, comfort preferences, and the warning signs that indicated overstimulation. She prepared enough bottles for the entire afternoon, pre-measured formula portions, and laid out extra clothes in case of diaper accidents. The instructions filled 2 full pages, single-spaced. As she printed them out, Isabelle wondered if she was being excessive, but then reminded herself that Sofia couldn't communicate her needs verbally. These details weren't paranoia, they were essential information for anyone responsible for her daughter's care. When Marcus and Chelsea arrived at 1 p.m., Isabelle noticed that Chelsea seemed different, more animated than usual, with a brightness in her eyes that suggested she was genuinely excited about the opportunity to care for Sofia. She had even dressed more appropriately, trading her usual revealing outfits for a simple t-shirt and jeans that would be practical for baby care. "I brought some stuff," Chelsea announced, holding up a small bag. "Just some things I thought might be fun for Sofia. Nothing crazy, just some toys and maybe some music to keep her entertained." Isabelle appreciated the thoughtfulness, though she wondered what toys Chelsea considered appropriate for a 3-week-old infant. Newborns had very limited visual focus and were easily overstimulated by too much sensory input. But she decided not to micromanage. This was an opportunity for Chelsea to bond with Sofia, and some flexibility might be beneficial for everyone involved. "She's been a little fussier than usual the past 2 days," Isabelle explained as she gathered her research materials. "If she starts crying and won't settle, try the swaddling technique I showed you, Marcus. And remember, she usually needs to eat every 2.5 to 3 hours." Chelsea waved dismissively at the instructions. "Don't worry about us. We've got this covered. You focus on your schoolwork and we'll take care of our little princess here." The casual confidence in Chelsea's voice triggered a small alarm in Isabelle's mind, but she pushed the feeling aside. She was probably just experiencing normal first-time mother anxiety about leaving Sofia with anyone other than herself. Chelsea was family, Marcus was Sofia's uncle, and they both genuinely cared about the baby's well-being. At the Denver Public Library, Isabelle threw herself into research with the focused intensity of someone who had limited time to accomplish a crucial task. The Special Collections Department contained archived newspapers, personal letters, and manuscripts from 19th-century Colorado writers that weren't available in digital format. Her paper analyzed the representation of Fronteau women in early Colorado literature, a topic that required careful examination of primary source materials. For the first 2 hours, she worked with remarkable efficiency, locating relevant documents and taking detailed notes. The quiet environment and intellectual challenge provided a welcome break from the constant vigilance required by newborn care. She found herself thinking more clearly than she had in weeks, her mind sharp and focused, in ways that reminded her of her pre-pregnancy academic abilities. But as the afternoon progressed, a nagging worry began to intrude on her concentration.
She found herself checking her phone every few minutes, hoping for updates from Marcus or Chelsea. The lack of communication could be interpreted as positive. No news meant no problems, but it also left her imagination free to conjure various scenarios of what might be going wrong at home.
At 4:30 p.m., she finally received a text from Marcus. "All good here. Sofia's been an angel. Chelsea's really getting the hang of this aunt thing." The message provided some reassurance, though Isabelle noticed it lacked the specific details she would have preferred. Was Sofia eating well? Had she been sleeping according to her usual pattern? Were they following the temperature guidelines for her bottles? She typed a quick response asking for more details, but didn't receive an immediate reply. By 5:45 p.m., Isabelle had gathered enough research material to write a comprehensive paper. She packed her notes carefully, checked out several books for additional reference, and began the drive home with a mixture of academic satisfaction and maternal anxiety. The research had gone better than expected, but 6 hours away from Sofia felt like an eternity. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Isabelle could hear voices and music coming from behind her door. The sounds seemed louder than she would have expected for an environment containing a newborn baby, but she reminded herself that Sofia needed to adapt to reasonable household noise levels. She opened the door to find Marcus and Chelsea in the living room, both appearing relaxed and happy. Sofia was awake in Chelsea's arms, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Then Isabelle noticed several details that made her pause. The apartment smelled different. Not unpleasant exactly, but unfamiliar. There was a slight sweetness in the air that she couldn't immediately identify. Chelsea's cheeks were flushed, and she seemed more animated than usual, laughing at something Marcus had said with a volume that seemed inappropriate for a room containing an infant. "How did everything go?" Isabelle asked, setting down her research materials and moving toward Sofia. "Amazing," Chelsea replied, her voice carrying an enthusiasm that bordered on giddy. "She's such a good baby, Isabelle. We had the best time together. I think I'm really getting the hang of this whole aunt thing." As Isabelle reached for Sofia, she noticed that her daughter seemed different too. The baby's usual alert eyes appeared slightly unfocused, and her typical responsiveness to Isabelle's voice seemed dulled. Sofia wasn't crying or showing obvious signs of distress, but there was something subtly off about her demeanor. "Did she eat on schedule?" Isabelle asked, checking Sofia's diaper and noting that it was clean, but seemed to have been changed recently. "Oh, yeah, she ate great," Marcus replied, though his answer seemed vague. "Chelsea was really good with the bottles and everything." Isabelle looked around the living room, noting that her carefully organized baby supplies had been moved. The bottle warmer was unplugged and pushed to one side, and there were items on the coffee table that hadn't been there when she left. A small glass that smelled faintly alcoholic, and what appeared to be the remains of some kind of mixed drink. "Were you two drinking?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the growing alarm in her chest. Chelsea laughed, a sound that confirmed Isabelle's suspicion. "Just a little celebration drink. We are toasting to successful babysitting. Don't worry, we weren't drunk or anything, just a tiny bit of wine to relax." The admission sent a chill through Isabelle's body. Sofia, her 3-week-old daughter, had been given alcohol by someone she had trusted with her most precious responsibility. The violation felt so profound that for a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what had happened. "You gave my newborn baby alcohol?" The words came out as a whisper, but they carried the force of a scream. Chelsea's defensive posture intensified. "It wasn't like I got her drunk or anything. It was literally just a tiny taste. People are so paranoid about everything these days. Babies are stronger than everyone thinks." But Isabelle was no longer listening to Chelsea's justifications. She was holding Sofia, examining her daughter's face, checking her breathing, and feeling the terror that comes with realizing that someone's ignorance has potentially endangered your child's life. The catalyst moment had arrived, though not in any way she could have anticipated. The trust she had carefully built, the boundaries she had established, the protective environment she had created, all of it had been shattered in the space of one afternoon by someone who thought a tiny sip of alcohol was harmless for a newborn baby. Everything that happened next would flow from this moment, this breach of trust so fundamental that it would forever change the dynamics of her family relationships and force her to confront just how far she was willing to go to protect her daughter.
The emergency room at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos typical of a Friday evening. Isabelle sat in a plastic chair that had been designed more for durability than comfort, clutching Sofia against her chest while trying to maintain her composure. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh, clinical glow that made the already surreal situation feel even more nightmarish. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the attending pediatric emergency physician, had immediately taken Sofia's case seriously when Isabelle explained what had happened. Unlike Chelsea's dismissive attitude about just a tiny sip, Dr. Walsh understood that any amount of alcohol could be dangerous for a newborn whose liver was still developing, and whose body weight made even minimal doses potentially toxic. "We're going to run some blood tests to check Sofia's blood alcohol content and liver function," Dr. Walsh had explained, her professional demeanor providing the kind of authoritative reassurance that Isabelle desperately needed. Newborns process alcohol very differently than adults. What might seem like an insignificant amount to someone Chelsea's size could have serious effects on a baby Sofia's age. The blood draw had been traumatic for both mother and daughter. Sofia's tiny veins made the procedure challenging, and her cries of distress had cut through Isabelle like physical pain. But the medical team worked with practiced efficiency, understanding that time was critical in cases of potential infant poisoning. While they waited for results, Isabelle found herself reliving the confrontation with Chelsea and Marcus that had preceded their rushed trip to the hospital. The memory played in her mind with vivid, painful clarity. "You need to understand how serious this is," Isabelle had said, her voice shaking with a combination of fear and fury. "Newborns can't process alcohol. Their livers aren't developed enough. This isn't some old wives' tale remedy. This could actually hurt her." Chelsea's response had been to double down on her defensiveness. "My grandmother raised 6 kids, and she used to put a little whiskey on their gums when they were teething. They all turned out fine. You're acting like it tried to poison her or something." "You don't understand," Isabelle had replied, her patience finally snapping. "Sofia isn't teething. She's 3 weeks old. And even if she were, alcohol isn't safe for babies. Ever. This isn't about being overprotective or anxious. This is about basic child safety." Marcus had tried to mediate, but his attempts at peacekeeping only revealed how little he understood about the gravity of the situation. "Maybe we're all overreacting a little," he had suggested. "Chelsea didn't mean any harm, and Sofia seems okay." But Sofia didn't seem okay to Isabelle. Her daughter's responses were slower than normal, her muscle tone seemed different, and there was something in her eyes that looked wrong to someone who had spent every day for 3 weeks learning to read her subtle cues. The decision to go to the emergency room had been entirely Isabelle's. Chelsea had argued that she was being dramatic, Marcus had worried about the cost of an unnecessary hospital visit, but Isabelle had reached the point where other people's opinions no longer mattered. Sofia's safety was her responsibility, and she would rather face accusations of overreaction than risk missing something serious. Now, sitting in the waiting area, Isabelle felt the full weight of single parenthood in a way she never had before. There was no co-parent to share the anxiety, no experienced family member to provide perspective, no support system beyond her own judgment and the medical professionals treating Sofia. Every decision was hers alone, and the consequences of those decisions would affect Sofia's entire future. Dr. Walsh returned after what felt like hours, but had actually been 45 minutes. Her expression was serious, but not alarmed, which Isabelle took as a cautiously positive sign. "We're going to run some blood tests to check Sofia's blood alcohol content and liver function," Dr. Walsh had explained, her professional demeanor providing the kind of authoritative reassurance that Isabelle desperately needed. Newborns process alcohol very differently than adults. What might seem like an insignificant amount to someone Chelsea's size could have serious effects on a baby Sofia's age. "The blood tests show a very low but detectable amount of alcohol in Sofia's system," she began, settling into the chair across from Isabelle.
The good news is that the levels aren't immediately life-threatening. However, any alcohol exposure in a newborn is concerning and requires careful monitoring. Isabelle felt a complex mix of relief and validation. Relief that Sofia wasn't in immediate danger, and validation that her decision to seek medical care had been appropriate rather than an overreaction. What does this mean for her long-term health? Isabelle asked, the question she had been afraid to voice. At the levels we detected, and assuming this was a single incident, Sofia is unlikely to experience lasting effects. However, we want to keep her here for observation overnight to monitor her vital signs and ensure her liver function remains stable. We'll also need to document this incident thoroughly. The mention of documentation sent a chill through Isabelle's chest. She understood the legal and ethical obligations that medical professionals had when treating cases of potential child endangerment, but the thought of Sofia's case being officially recorded as an incident of alcohol exposure felt overwhelming. "Is this something that will be reported to authorities?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Walsh's expression grew more serious. Colorado law requires healthcare providers to report suspected child abuse or neglect to the Department of Human Services. Given that Sofia is a newborn who was given alcohol by a caregiver, this situation meets the criteria for a mandatory report.
The words hit Isabelle like a physical blow. Child Protective Services would become involved in their lives, investigating her fitness as a parent and the safety of Sofia's living environment. The irony was devastating. Her careful attention to Sofia's needs and her decision to seek immediate medical care were exactly the kind of responsible parenting that should protect her from scrutiny. Yet the incident that triggered the report had occurred because she had trusted family members to care for her daughter. I want you to know that seeking medical care when you suspected something was wrong shows excellent parental judgment, Dr. Welsh added, perhaps sensing Isabelle's distress. CPS investigations can be stressful, but they're designed to ensure child safety. The fact that you brought Sofia in immediately will be viewed favorably in any assessment of your parenting. As Sofia was admitted for overnight observation, Isabelle began the process of notifying the people who needed to know about the situation. Her first call was to Mrs. Patricia Williams, both as her supervisor and as someone whose judgment she trusted. "Oh my God, Isabelle." Patricia's voice carried genuine shock and concern. "How is Sofia, and how are you holding up?" The conversation that followed was both professionally and personally supportive. Patricia assured Isabelle that Little Sprouts would provide whatever flexibility she needed during the hospital stay and any subsequent investigations. More importantly, she offered the perspective of someone who had worked with families in crisis for over 2 decades. "What Chelsea did was inexcusable," Patricia said firmly, "but your response, recognizing something was wrong and getting immediate medical care, is exactly what a good mother should do. Don't let anyone make you question that decision." Her second call was more difficult. Isabelle knew she needed to contact Marcus both to update him on Sofia's condition and to begin the conversation about how this incident would affect their family relationships going forward. "How is she?" Marcus asked immediately when he answered the phone, his voice tight with worry. "She's stable, but they're keeping her overnight for observation. Marcus, we need to talk about what happens next. This is going to be reported to Child Protective Services, and there are going to be consequences." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a defensive edge that Isabelle recognized as his response to feeling cornered. "Look, I know Chelsea made a mistake, but don't you think involving CPS is a little extreme? She didn't mean to hurt Sofia. Maybe we can handle this as a family without getting the government involved." This comment revealed how fundamentally Marcus misunderstood the situation. This wasn't about punishment or family drama. It was about Sofia's safety and Isabelle's legal obligations as her mother. The involvement of Child Protective Services wasn't optional. It was a mandatory consequence of the incident. "I didn't involve CPS," Isabelle explained, trying to keep her voice patient despite her exhaustion. "The hospital is required by law to report this. And honestly, Marcus, I need to know that Sofia is safe. What Chelsea did showed such poor judgment that I can't trust her around my daughter anymore."
This declaration marked a turning point in the conversation, and Isabelle realized in her relationship with her brother. For the first time since their parents' death, she was drawing a clear boundary that prioritized Sofia's well-being over family harmony. "You're really going to ban Chelsea from seeing Sofia? She made one mistake, Isabelle. People learn from their mistakes." "She gave alcohol to a newborn, Marcus. That's not a small mistake. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of child safety that could have seriously hurt Sofia." The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Isabelle to face the reality that protecting Sofia might mean fracturing her relationship with the only family she had left. As she settled into the uncomfortable reclining chair next to Sofia's hospital crib, watching the monitors track her daughter's vital signs, Isabelle understood that the challenges ahead would test not just her parenting skills, but her courage to make difficult decisions when other people disagreed with her choices. The initial crisis was stabilizing, but the real work of protecting Sofia and rebuilding their sense of security was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring social workers, official investigations, and the beginning of a process that would force Isabelle to prove that she could provide a safe environment for her daughter while navigating the complex emotions of family betrayal and broken trust. As Sofia slept peacefully under the watchful eyes of medical monitors, Isabelle made a silent promise. Whatever it took, whoever she had to disappoint or confront, Sofia's safety would never again be compromised by misplaced trust or family pressure. The stakes were too high, and the responsibility too sacred for anything less than absolute vigilance.
The Child Protective Services office on West Colfax Avenue was a testament to institutional functionality over comfort. Gray carpeting, fluorescent lighting, and motivational posters about child safety created an environment that felt simultaneously sterile and overwhelming. Isabelle sat in the waiting area, Sofia secured in her car seat beside her, preparing for what felt like the most important conversation of her life. 3 days had passed since the hospital incident, and Sofia had been medically cleared with no lasting effects from the alcohol exposure. But the mandatory CPS investigation had opened a door that couldn't be closed, launching a process that would scrutinize every aspect of Isabelle's parenting and living situation. Sarah Chen, the caseworker assigned to their file, emerged from an office carrying a thick folder. She was younger than Isabelle had expected, perhaps 35, with an efficiency of movement that suggested someone accustomed to managing heavy caseloads under tight deadlines. Her handshake was firm, her smile professional, but not unkind. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming in today. I know this process can feel overwhelming, but I want you to understand that our primary goal is ensuring Sofia's safety and supporting your family's well-being." The interview room was small but comfortable, with a play area in one corner and family photos on the walls that seemed designed to create a less intimidating atmosphere. Sarah settled across from Isabelle with her laptop open and a legal pad at the ready. "I've reviewed the hospital report and Dr. Walsh's notes. Can you walk me through the events of that afternoon from your perspective?" Isabelle had rehearsed this narrative in her mind countless times, but speaking it aloud to a government official who held significant power over her family's future felt different than recounting it to medical professionals or trusted friends. She chose her words carefully, focusing on facts rather than emotions. "I needed to complete research for a college paper that required access to physical archives. My brother Marcus and his girlfriend Chelsea offered to babysit Sofia. I left detailed instructions about her care routine and returned home to find that Chelsea had given Sofia alcohol without my knowledge or consent." Sarah took notes while Isabelle spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timeline and specifics. Her approach was methodical rather than accusatory, but Isabelle could sense the underlying evaluation happening with every response. "Tell me about your support system. Besides Marcus and Chelsea, who else is involved in Sofia's care?" The question highlighted one of Isabelle's most significant vulnerabilities. Her support network was limited by circumstance: deceased parents, an absent father for Sofia, friends who had moved on to different life stages. The isolation that had felt manageable before the incident now seemed like a potential liability in the eyes of child protection services. My supervisor at Little Sprouts Daycare, Patricia Williams, has been very supportive. She's been working in childcare for over 20 years and has provided guidance about infant development and parenting resources. I also have connections with other young mothers from my prenatal classes, though those relationships are still developing. Sarah nodded, making additional notes. What about Sofia's father? Is he involved in her care or providing financial support? This question triggered a familiar mixture of anger and sadness. James had disappeared so completely from our lives that Sofia might as well have been conceived through immaculate conception. His absence wasn't just emotional abandonment, it was a practical problem that affected everything from emergency contacts to financial stability. He relocated to California before Sofia was born and hasn't maintained contact. I haven't received any financial support, and he's expressed no interest in parental responsibilities. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from Isabelle's educational goals to her apartment's safety features. Sarah's questions were comprehensive. How did Isabelle handle Sofia's fussy periods? What was her approach to discipline as Sofia grew older? How did she plan to balance work, education, and parenting responsibilities? Each question felt like a test with potentially life-altering consequences. Isabelle found herself second-guessing responses that should have been straightforward, wondering if her careful approach to parenting might be perceived as anxiety, or if her ambitious educational goals might suggest misplaced priorities. I'd like to schedule a home visit for later this week. This will give me an opportunity to observe Sofia in her usual environment and assess the safety and appropriateness of your living situation. The prospect of having her home inspected by a government official felt invasive, but Isabelle understood that cooperation was essential. Of course, what should I expect during the visit?
I'll be looking at basic safety measures, childproofing, cleanliness, adequate space and supplies for Sofia's needs. I'll also want to observe your interaction with Sofia and discuss your daily routines. The goal is to get a complete picture of Sofia's living environment. As Isabelle prepared to leave, Sarah made one final comment that would prove significant in the days to come. I should mention that we'll also need to interview Marcus and Chelsea as part of this investigation. Given that the incident occurred while Sofia was in their care, we need to assess their understanding of child safety and their future role in Sofia's life. The drive home from the CPS office took Isabelle through neighborhoods where families pushed strollers on tree-lined sidewalks and children played in well-maintained parks. The normalcy of these scenes felt foreign now that her own family was under official scrutiny. She wondered if other parents in similar situations felt this same sense of living under a microscope, where every decision carried the potential for misinterpretation. That evening, Marcus called to discuss his upcoming CPS interview. The conversation revealed how differently they were processing the ongoing investigation and its implications for their family dynamics. "I talked to Chelsea about what happened," Marcus began, his tone suggesting he was attempting diplomacy. "She feels really bad about the whole thing. She wants to apologize to you directly and maybe take some kind of parenting class or something to show that she's learned from this." The offer sounded reasonable on the surface, but it revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation's gravity. Chelsea's willingness to take a parenting class was a positive gesture, but it didn't address the core issue of judgment and decision-making that had led to the incident. "Marcus, I appreciate that Chelsea feels bad, but this isn't something that can be fixed with an apology and a class. She made a decision that could have seriously harmed Sofia. That shows a level of poor judgment that I can't ignore." "But people make mistakes, Isabelle. Even good people. Chelsea isn't some monster. She just didn't know better. Isn't giving her a chance to learn and prove she can do better the right thing to do?" The conversation touched on one of the most challenging aspects of the entire situation. Isabelle didn't believe Chelsea was malicious or intentionally harmful. In many ways, it would have been easier if she were,
Malicious intent would make the decision to exclude her from Sofia's life straightforward. But incompetence and poor judgment, while less emotionally satisfying to condemn, were potentially just as dangerous for a vulnerable infant. It's not about whether Chelsea is a good person, Isabelle explained. It's about whether I can trust her to make safe decisions for Sofia. What she did wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice based on fundamentally wrong information about infant safety. Even if she takes classes now, can I ever be confident that she won't make another mistake when I'm not there to supervise? The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the impossible position the incident had created. Forgiveness and reconciliation might be emotionally healing for the family, but Sofia's safety required a level of caution that didn't allow for second chances when the stakes were so high. Marcus's response revealed the depth of the divide that was growing between the siblings. You know, sometimes I think you use Sofia as an excuse to control everyone around you. Maybe this whole thing is less about protecting her and more about you feeling like you're the only one who knows how to do anything right. The accusation stung because it contained just enough psychological insight to feel personal. Isabelle had always been the responsible sibling, the one who planned ahead and anticipated problems. But was it possible that her protective instincts had evolved into something more controlling? Was she using legitimate safety concerns to justify excluding people who challenged her authority? These questions would continue to plague her as the CPS investigation progressed. Sarah Chen's home visit was scheduled for Thursday, and Isabelle found herself preparing with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She researched child-proofing techniques that went beyond basic requirements, organized Sofia's supplies with museum-like precision, and rehearsed explanations for every aspect of their daily routine. The complexity of the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about proving that Sofia was safe in Isabelle's care. It was about navigating the broader questions of family relationships, trust, and the balance between protection and connection. The investigation would force her to articulate not just what she was protecting Sofia from, but what kind of family environment she was trying to create. As she fell asleep on Wednesday night, Sofia sleeping peacefully in the crib beside her bed, Isabelle realized that the outcome of the CPS investigation would determine more than just whether she could keep custody of her daughter. It would define the kind of mother she was going to be and the kind of family they were going to become.
The sound of Sofia's cries at 3:47 a.m. pierced through the fragile peace Isabelle had managed to build in the week following the CPS home visit. But these weren't the typical hunger or discomfort cries she had learned to distinguish over the past month. These were the sharp, inconsolable wails that every parent dreads, the sound of genuine distress that signals something is seriously wrong. Sarah Chen's home inspection had gone better than expected. The caseworker had praised Isabelle's organization, noted the obvious love and attention Sofia received, and seemed satisfied with the safety measures in place. But she had also delivered news that turned Isabelle's world upside down. Marcus and Chelsea's interview had not gone well, and the investigation was being extended pending a psychological evaluation of all parties involved. Chelsea's responses to our questions about child safety showed significant gaps in understanding, Sarah had explained during a follow-up phone call. She seemed unable to comprehend why giving alcohol to an infant was dangerous, even after we provided educational materials. This suggests a pattern of poor judgment that extends beyond a single incident. More troubling was Marcus's reaction during his interview. When asked about his sister's parenting style, he had described Isabelle as obsessive and controlling, suggesting that the restrictive environment she created might be harmful to Sofia's development. He had also revealed that he and Chelsea were considering consulting a lawyer about grandparents' rights, despite neither of them being Sofia's grandparents. Now, holding her screaming daughter at nearly 4 a.m., Isabelle felt the weight of these revelations crushing down on her.
Sofia's temperature was slightly elevated, not dangerously high, but enough to warrant concern. Her usual soothing techniques weren't working, and the baby's cries had taken on a quality that triggered every maternal alarm bell in Isabelle's consciousness. The pediatric nurse hotline advised bringing Sofia to the emergency room for evaluation. As Isabelle gathered supplies and prepared for another middle-of-the-night hospital visit, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was falling apart simultaneously. The CPS investigation was expanding rather than resolving, her family relationships were deteriorating, and now Sofia was genuinely ill. At Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, Dr. Michael Foster, the night pediatrician, conducted a thorough examination while Isabelle provided a detailed history of Sofia's symptoms. The professional competence was reassuring, but Isabelle noticed something in the medical staff's demeanor that hadn't been present during their previous visit. "I see from Sofia's records that you were here recently for alcohol exposure," Dr. Foster mentioned while reviewing her chart. His tone was neutral, but Isabelle sensed an underlying scrutiny that made her feel defensive. "That incident didn't involve me," she replied quickly. "It happened while she was in the care of family members, and I brought her here immediately when I discovered what had occurred." Dr. Foster nodded, but Isabelle noticed him making additional notes in Sofia's file. She realized with growing horror that Sofia's medical records now contained documentation of alcohol exposure, creating a permanent marker that would follow them through any future medical interactions. After several hours of testing and observation, Dr. Foster determined that Sofia was experiencing a mild upper respiratory infection, concerning in a newborn but not life-threatening with proper treatment. However, his discharge instructions included a recommendation for additional follow-up with CPS to ensure Isabelle had adequate support for managing Sofia's medical needs. "Is that really necessary?" Isabelle asked, feeling the walls closing in around her. "I brought her here as soon as I noticed symptoms. I'm following all the medical recommendations." "It's standard protocol when we have an infant with a recent CPS case," Dr. Foster explained. "The infection isn't related to the previous incident, but we want to ensure you have all the resources you need for Sofia's care." The drive home as dawn broke over Denver felt like a journey through a nightmare that refused to end. Sofia was stable, but would require medication and careful monitoring for the next week. The CPS investigation was intensifying rather than resolving, her family relationships were deteriorating, and now Sofia was genuinely ill. Back at her apartment, Isabelle called in sick to work and settled into what she knew would be a long day of caring for a sick infant while managing her own emotional crisis. Mrs. Patricia Williams had been understanding about the time off, but Isabelle was acutely aware that her absences were creating strain at Little Sprouts during their busiest season.
Around noon, her phone rang with a call from Sarah Chen. The caseworker's voice carried a formality that immediately put Isabelle on edge. "Ms. Martinez, I need to inform you of some developments in Sofia's case. We've received additional information that requires investigation, and I'll need to schedule another interview with you as soon as possible." "What kind of additional information?" Isabelle asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Your brother has filed a formal complaint alleging that your parenting style may be detrimental to Sofia's well-being. He's provided examples of what he describes as obsessive behavior and social isolation that he believes could impact Sofia's development." The betrayal hit Isabelle like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just criticized her parenting in a casual interview, he had formally accused her of being an unfit mother. The brother she had protected and supported through their parents' death, the uncle she had trusted with Sofia's care, was now actively working to undermine her custody. "Can you give me specifics about these allegations?" Isabelle asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I can't discuss the details over the phone, but the concerns include allegations of excessive medical visits, social isolation, and controlling behavior that limits Sofia's exposure to family relationships. We'll need to address these claims thoroughly during our next meeting." After hanging up, Isabelle sat in her living room watching Sofia sleep in her bouncy seat and felt the full magnitude of her isolation. The people she had relied on for support were either gone, unavailable, or actively working against her. Her parents were dead, Sofia's father was absent, and now her only remaining family member was trying to prove she was an unfit mother.
The afternoon brought another devastating phone call, this one from Patricia Williams. Her supervisor's voice carried a reluctance that immediately signaled bad news. Isabelle, I need to discuss a difficult situation. The daycare center's board has been made aware of the ongoing CPS investigation, and they've expressed concerns about potential liability issues. The implication was clear before Patricia even finished explaining. Little Sprouts was a licensed childcare facility that depended on maintaining an impeccable reputation with parents and regulatory agencies. Having an employee under active CPS investigation, regardless of the circumstances, created risks that the board wasn't willing to accept. They're not terminating your employment, Patricia clarified, but they're requiring you to take unpaid leave until the investigation is resolved. I fought for you, Isabelle, but my hands are tied by board policy. The financial implications were immediately catastrophic. Without her income from Little Sprouts, Isabelle couldn't afford rent, utilities, or Sofia's medical expenses. Her emergency fund might cover basic needs for a few weeks, but any extended period without income would force impossible choices between Sofia's care and their housing stability. More devastating than the financial impact was the professional blow. The assistant director position she had been working toward was now impossible to pursue. Her reputation in the Denver childcare community would be permanently marked by the CPS investigation, regardless of its outcome. Years of careful career building had been destroyed by one afternoon of misplaced trust. As evening fell, Isabelle faced the darkest moment of her young motherhood. Sofia was sick and needed constant care. The CPS investigation was expanding based on her own brother's accusations. Her income had been eliminated indefinitely, and the isolation she had been managing was now complete. She had no one left to call for help. She prepared Sofia's evening bottle with hands that shook from exhaustion and stress, wondering how she was going to survive the next day, much less the weeks or months the investigation might require. The apartment that had felt like a safe haven now felt like a prison where she waited for the next crisis to arrive. The crisis point had arrived not as a single dramatic event, but as the convergence of multiple disasters that threatened to overwhelm her capacity to cope. Everything she had worked to build, her career, her family relationships, her sense of security, was crumbling simultaneously while she tried to care for a sick infant who depended entirely on her stability. As Sofia finally settled into peaceful sleep, Isabelle realized that she had reached the moment every parent fears most, the point where love alone isn't enough to protect your child from the forces threatening to tear your family apart. Tomorrow would require finding strength she wasn't sure she possessed and making decisions that would determine whether they could survive this crisis intact.
The turning point came in the most unexpected place, the waiting room of the Denver Community Legal Services Office, where Isabelle had gone seeking help she couldn't afford from a system she didn't understand. Sofia, now recovering from her respiratory infection, slept peacefully in her carrier, while Isabelle filled out forms with hands that had stopped shaking for the first time in days. Attorney Rebecca Santos emerged from her office carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the kind of confident expression that suggested she had seen situations like this before. At 43, Rebecca had spent her entire career advocating for families caught in the bureaucratic machinery of child protection services, and she understood that the system designed to protect children sometimes traumatized the very families it was meant to help. Ms. Martinez, I've reviewed the preliminary information you provided, Rebecca began, settling into the chair across from Isabelle with the relaxed authority of someone genuinely comfortable in crisis situations. Before we discuss legal strategies, I want you to understand something important. You are not powerless in this situation. The words hit Isabelle with unexpected force. For weeks, she had felt like a passive victim of circumstances beyond her control, subject to CPS investigations, medical emergencies, family betrayals, and employment consequences that seemed to cascade without any input from her. The possibility that she might have agency in determining the outcome felt revolutionary. What you've described isn't a case of poor parenting, Rebecca continued, reviewing the notes she had taken during their initial consultation.
It's a case of a responsible mother who made a difficult decision to seek help during a family crisis, and who has been punished for that decision by people who should have been supporting her. Rebecca's analysis reframed the entire narrative in ways that Isabelle hadn't considered. Instead of viewing herself as someone who had failed to protect Sofia from harm, she could see herself as someone who had successfully identified danger and taken immediate action to address it. The CPS investigation wasn't evidence of her inadequacy as a parent. It was proof that the system was working as designed to investigate potential threats to child safety. Your brother's complaints actually work in your favor, Rebecca explained, spreading several documents across the small conference table. His allegations are vague and emotional rather than specific and factual. He claims you're obsessive about Sofia's care, but the evidence shows appropriate attention to an infant's needs. He says you're socially isolated, but you're actually engaged with professional support systems and educational advancement. For the first time since the incident began, Isabelle felt a spark of hope. Rebecca's professional perspective revealed that many of the things that felt like weaknesses in her case were actually strengths when viewed through the lens of child welfare law. More importantly, Rebecca continued, Chelsea's behavior represents exactly the kind of poor judgment that CPS is designed to identify and address. The fact that she still doesn't understand why giving alcohol to a newborn is dangerous, even after professional education, demonstrates a fundamental inability to prioritize child safety. Rebecca's strategy was multifaceted and aggressive. First, they would request that the CPS investigation be expedited by providing comprehensive documentation of Isabelle's parenting competence. This would include testimony from Sofia's pediatrician, evaluations from child development specialists, and character references from her colleagues at Little Sprouts. Second, they would file a formal complaint against Marcus and Chelsea for child endangerment, shifting the focus from Isabelle's alleged overprotectiveness to their documented poor judgment. This wasn't about revenge. It was about creating an official record that would protect Sofia from future incidents. Third, they would pursue legal action to establish formal boundaries around Sofia's care, including restraining orders if necessary to prevent Marcus and Chelsea from gaining unsupervised access to the baby. The goal isn't to punish your family, Rebecca explained. It's to create a legal framework that protects Sofia while allowing healthy relationships to continue under appropriate supervision. The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which Isabelle's understanding of her situation underwent a complete transformation. Instead of being a victim of circumstance, she was an advocate fighting for her daughter's safety. Instead of being isolated and powerless, she was connected to legal resources and professional support systems that could help her navigate the crisis.
As she left the legal aid office, Isabelle felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks, a sense of control over her own life. The challenges hadn't disappeared, but she now had a plan for addressing them systematically rather than simply enduring them passively. Her first stop was Dr. Sarah Chen's office, where Sofia was scheduled for a follow-up appointment regarding her recent illness. Dr. Chen had been Sofia's pediatrician since birth, and her perspective would be crucial for the CPS evaluation. "How are you holding up, Isabelle?" Dr. Chen asked as she conducted Sofia's examination. "I heard about the investigation. That must be incredibly stressful." The question opened a door for Isabelle to share her experience in ways she hadn't been able to do with anyone else. Dr. Chen listened without judgment as Isabelle described the incident, the investigation, and the ongoing family conflict. "You know," Dr. Chen said thoughtfully as she documented Sofia's healthy recovery from the respiratory infection, "I've been practicing pediatric medicine for 15 years, and I can recognize excellent parenting when I see it. Your attention to Sofia's needs, your quick response to medical concerns, your commitment to following medical recommendations, these are the hallmarks of a devoted mother." Dr. Chen's validation felt like water in a desert. After weeks of having her parenting scrutinized and criticized, hearing professional confirmation of her competence was emotionally overwhelming. "I'd be happy to provide documentation for your CPS case.
Sofia is thriving under your care, and that's not an accident. It's the result of consistent, loving, and informed parenting. The appointment concluded with Dr. Chen writing a detailed letter for Isabelle's legal file, documenting Sofia's excellent health and development, despite the stress of recent weeks. The letter would become a crucial piece of evidence in demonstrating that Isabelle's careful approach to parenting was producing positive outcomes for her daughter. Returning home, Isabelle found herself viewing her apartment with new eyes. Instead of seeing the cramped space of someone struggling financially, she saw a thoughtfully organized environment designed around an infant's needs. The detailed feeding schedules weren't evidence of obsession, they were tools for ensuring consistent care. The extensive baby supplies weren't excessive anxiety, they were preparation for various scenarios. That evening, she made a phone call that required significant courage. Mrs. Patricia Williams answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the warmth that had made her a mentor figure in Isabelle's life. "Patricia, I wanted to update you on my situation and ask for your support in a formal capacity," Isabelle began, her voice steadier than it had been in days. "I understand that the daycare's board has concerns about liability, but I'm hoping you might be willing to provide a professional reference regarding my work with children." The conversation that followed was more positive than Isabelle had dared to hope. Patricia not only agreed to provide a comprehensive letter of recommendation, but also offered to testify on Isabelle's behalf if necessary. "You know, Isabelle, I've watched you work with children for over a year, and I've seen you interact with Sofia since her birth. Your instincts are excellent, your knowledge is solid, and your commitment is unwavering. The board's decision is about policy, not about your qualifications as a caregiver." More importantly, Patricia revealed that several board members had privately expressed frustration with the policy requiring unpaid leave during investigations. There was growing support for revising the policy to allow case-by-case evaluations rather than blanket suspensions. As the day concluded, Isabelle experienced a transformation that went beyond the practical improvements in her legal situation. The helplessness that had characterized her response to recent crises was being replaced by purposeful action. Instead of waiting for others to determine her fate, she was actively building the case for Sofia's continued placement in her care. The breakthrough hadn't come from a single dramatic moment, but from the accumulation of professional validation, legal advocacy, and her own growing understanding of her rights and resources. For the first time since the incident began, Isabelle fell asleep feeling optimistic about the future rather than terrified of the next crisis. Tomorrow would bring continued challenges, but she now faced them with tools, allies, and a renewed sense of her own competence as Sofia's mother. The transformation from victim to advocate was complete, and she was ready to fight for her family with everything she had learned.
6 months later, Isabelle stood in the community room of the Denver Family Justice Center, addressing a group of young mothers who had found themselves navigating the child protection system. Sofia, now a healthy 8-month-old with bright brown eyes and an infectious smile, sat contentedly in her high chair, occasionally babbling as if adding her own commentary to her mother's presentation. "The most important thing I learned," Isabelle said to the audience of 15 women, "is that advocating for your child isn't the same as being defensive about your parenting. When you know you're doing right by your child, you have to stand firm in that knowledge, even when people you trust question your decisions." The CPS investigation had concluded 3 months earlier with a finding of unsubstantiated regarding any concerns about Isabelle's parenting and substantiated regarding the alcohol incident involving Chelsea. The legal framework Rebecca Santos had helped establish meant that Marcus and Chelsea could maintain a relationship with Sofia, but only under supervised conditions that prioritized the baby's safety. The transformation in Isabelle's life extended far beyond the resolution of the legal issues. The crisis had forced her to examine every aspect of her support system, her goals, and her understanding of what it meant to be a protective parent. What emerged was a stronger, more confident version of herself who had learned to distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear. "I used to think that being a good mother meant preventing anything bad from ever happening to my daughter," she continued, glancing at Sofia, who was now attempting to grab a colorful toy just out of reach.
but I learned that being a good mother means teaching your child to navigate a world that isn't always safe while surrounding them with people who genuinely prioritize their well-being. The audience included women of various ages and backgrounds, but they all shared the common experience of having their parenting scrutinized by government agencies. Some were dealing with domestic violence situations, others with substance abuse issues, and still others, like Isabelle, had found themselves caught in the system due to the actions of people they had trusted. Rebecca Santos, who had become not just Isabelle's attorney, but also a mentor and friend, watched from the back of the room. The legal aid organization had asked Isabelle to speak because her case represented something they rarely saw, a complete victory that resulted not just in family preservation, but in genuine empowerment of the parent involved. "How do you handle the ongoing relationship with your brother?" asked Maria, a 28-year-old whose own family dynamics had been complicated by CPS involvement. "That seems like it would be the hardest part." Isabelle considered the question carefully. The relationship with Marcus had been permanently altered by his decision to file complaints against her parenting, but it hadn't been completely severed. The supervised visitation arrangement had actually improved their interactions by removing the pressure and ambiguity that had characterized their previous boundaries. It took me a long time to understand that loving someone doesn't mean trusting them with everything that matters to you. Marcus is Sofia's uncle, and he loves her, but he also showed poor judgment in a critical situation. Now we have a relationship that acknowledges both of those truths. The new arrangement meant that Marcus could spend time with Sofia, but only in Isabelle's presence or in neutral locations, like family restaurants or parks. Chelsea was not permitted unsupervised access to Sofia, and any future violations of the established boundaries would result in more restrictive measures. Surprisingly, this structure had actually improved Marcus and Isabelle's relationship. Without the pressure of being asked to provide childcare or make decisions about Sofia's welfare, Marcus could focus on being a loving uncle without the weight of responsibilities he wasn't equipped to handle. "What about your career plans?" asked another audience member. "Did all of this affect your education and work goals?" This question touched on one of the most positive outcomes of the entire experience. Little Sprouts Daycare had not only welcomed Isabelle back after the investigation concluded, but had also fast-tracked her promotion to assistant director. The board had recognized that her handling of a genuine crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and advocacy they wanted in a leadership position. "The crisis actually clarified my career goals," Isabelle explained. "I realized that my experience could help other families facing similar challenges. I'm now pursuing a dual degree in early childhood education and family advocacy with plans to eventually work in policy development for child protection services."
The academic path was more challenging than her original plan, but it was also more meaningful. Isabelle had discovered that her experience navigating the system gave her insights that could benefit other families caught in similar situations. She had learned to speak the language of social workers, attorneys, and child protection investigators in ways that could help parents advocate more effectively for themselves. Sofia's development had flourished throughout the entire ordeal, providing daily evidence that children could thrive even in the midst of adult conflicts when their primary caregiver remained stable and focused on their needs. At 8 months, Sofia was meeting all her developmental milestones, demonstrating the secure attachment that comes from consistent, responsive caregiving. "The hardest lesson," Isabelle continued, addressing a question about trust and relationships, "was learning that you can love people while still protecting your child from their poor judgment. I had to stop feeling guilty about setting boundaries that some people thought were too strict." This insight had applications beyond the immediate crisis. Isabelle had learned to evaluate all of Sofia's relationships, from potential babysitters to playmates' families, through the lens of safety and appropriateness rather than social obligation or convenience. The result was a smaller but much more reliable support network. Dr. Sarah Chen had become not just Sofia's pediatrician, but also a professional mentor who helped Isabelle understand child development from both practical and research perspectives. Mrs. Patricia Williams continued to provide guidance on both career development and parenting challenges. Rebecca Santos had introduced Isabelle to other parents who had successfully navigated similar legal challenges.
I want to be clear about something, Isabelle said as her presentation drew to a close. I'm not here because I'm a perfect mother who never makes mistakes. I'm here because I learned that good parenting isn't about perfection. It's about consistently prioritizing your child's well-being, even when that means making difficult decisions that other people don't understand. The Q&A session that followed revealed the hunger that many parents felt for practical guidance about navigating systems that felt hostile and confusing. Isabelle found herself providing not just emotional support, but concrete information about legal resources, documentation strategies, and communication techniques that could help parents advocate more effectively for their children. As the event concluded, several women approached Isabelle privately to share their own stories and ask for additional guidance. She exchanged contact information with those who were interested in ongoing support, recognizing that the network she was building could benefit everyone involved. The drive home took Isabelle through the same Denver neighborhoods where she had grown up, but her perspective on them had fundamentally changed. Instead of seeing only the challenges and limitations of her circumstances, she now saw opportunities and possibilities. The crisis that had threatened to destroy their family had ultimately made them stronger and more secure. That evening, as she prepared Sofia for bed following their established routine, Isabelle reflected on how much had changed since that terrifying afternoon when she had discovered Chelsea's dangerous decision. The trust that had been broken hadn't been rebuilt, it had been replaced with something more durable: knowledge, legal protection, and a support network based on shared values rather than family obligation. Sofia, now sitting up independently and beginning to show interest in solid foods, represented not just Isabelle's daughter, but also her motivation for continued growth and advocacy. Every milestone Sofia reached was evidence that children could thrive when surrounded by adults who genuinely understood the responsibility of caring for someone so vulnerable. As she turned off the nursery light and activated the baby monitor, Isabelle felt a deep sense of completion. The story that had begun with betrayal and crisis had evolved into one of empowerment and purpose. She had protected Sofia not just from immediate danger, but from a pattern of poor judgment that could have affected her entire childhood. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that felt both exciting and manageable. Graduate school, career advancement, and continued advocacy work would provide structure and meaning to their lives. Sofia would grow up understanding that safety wasn't about living in fear, but about surrounding yourself with people who demonstrated wisdom, competence, and genuine care. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all, not just for her own journey as a parent, but for the message she could now share with other mothers facing their own moments of crisis and transformation. The trust they kept was not the trust that had been broken, but the new trust built on wisdom, experience, and the unshakable commitment to putting their children's safety and well-being above all other considerations.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.